we're talking about the rest day. So you have the rest day at the beginning of Pesach, you have the rest day at the end of Pesach, and again, we talked about Yom Tov being a slightly different character of rest, but mostly like the rest of Shabbos, and a little bit about Chol Hamoed. Okay. And then we talked about Sfiras HaOmer. And so the Rambam, part of his discussion here is to explain why this is one mitzvah, even though it seems to contain two elements, counting the days and the weeks. And then we talked a little bit about Sfiras HaOmer and the significance of the 50th day. In other words, does it work out that the 50th day is Shavuos? It is Shavuos, but does it work out that it's aligned with when the Torah was given? So, and is that important? So I was suggesting that that's one of the reasons it's so important to emphasize that we start counting the Omer on the 16th and not on the first Sunday after Pesach, because this way it always aligns with the Sinai event. That issue about the way we celebrate Shavuos, it's one of the mysteries for me, which is who decided to make the switch? When was it decided that we're going to primarily associate Shavuos with Sinai, as opposed to the Bikurim, the first fruits, and the wheat harvest? You'd guess that it happened in exile, and it may have happened right away in exile after destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, but there's no record of it. It's just interesting to me. There's no record of the decision. There's no, as far as I know, there's no record of them making the choice to switch emphasis. We just take it so much for granted. It's like, to even question it is, would be annoying to a lot of people. But it's just one of those things, like, why isn't it a matter of curiosity, like when this happened? Like we have, for instance, there was a decision that we're going to continue to celebrate the 2 days of Yom Tov outside of Israel. That's recorded from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai or Rabbi Gamliel, I don't remember who. I think it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, to remember, because we want to remember how things happened while the Beis Hamikdash was up. But we do it for different reasons, and it's custom. It's not even a law. It's not a rabbinic law that outside of Israel you keep 2 days Yom Tov for, let's say, for Pesach and Sukkot and Shavuos. That's not even, doesn't have the status of rabbinic law. It has a status of custom, and we have a record of the decision to do it. We have a record of a lot of the decisions they made in the wake of the transformation. But this, I don't know of any record of it, who made the decision, and even acknowledging that a decision was made, which is sort of interesting, kind of mystery. So now we have Mitzvah 163. That is that he commanded us to rest from work on the day of Atzeres, Shavuos. And that is his, may he be blessed, saying, on that same day you shall call, etc. That's part of the Torah portion of Emor. And so the day is called Atzeret, which is another word for stopping or resting, and it suggests that it is a holiday. Now we have another holiday that is called Atzeret, and that is Shmini Atzeret, and that is the day after Sukkot ends. So Sukkot is technically a 7-day holiday. We add another day. The Torah says that there is this other day that's called Shmini, the 8th day, Atzeret. So it's also an Atzeret day. When you see the treatment of Shmini Atzeret, you see that it, even in the Gemara, it's understood to be a day that has elements of Sukkot still in it. You do not have the mitzvah of the Daled meaning of the 4 species. You do not have the mitzvah of Sukkah. So those mitzvot end, but there is some kind of crossover that is kind of expected from the day. So it'll say, like, there's certain things that we do on Shmini Atzeret that indicate that it's its own separate holiday, and there's certain things that we do that suggest that it's still working, let's say, on the fumes of Sukkot. In the Midrash, when it talks about Shmini Atzeret, we're going to eventually get to it, but in the Midrash, when it talks about Shmini Atzeret, it says, imagine a king who invited his whole kingdom to a week-long celebration, and then he goes to his closest advisors and asks them to spend an extra day because he says, it's hard for me that you're leaving. Kosher lai predastan. It's hard for me to separate from you. So let's have this day together. So that suggests that it's a kind of, there's a kind of holdover energy from what was there before. It's a kind of special day in its own right, but it's still a kind of holdover. So you'll see this kind of language about Shavuos, that Shavuos is to Pesach what Shmini Atzeret is to Sukkot. It happens to be farther out. So think of Shmini Atzeret and Shavuos as moons around a planet, either Sukkot or Pesach. So they're both moons, as it were, but one is just more distant than the other. But it's working on the gravitational pull of the larger holiday. And so you'll see this kind of attitude towards Pesach with the in this case with Sfiras HaOmer representing a kind of gravitational connection between the two of them. So if you want to understand the place of Shavuos, in some regards it's its own entity, and is there's Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, 3 pilgrimage festivals, and it occupies this kind of special status, the same status that Pesach and Sukkot have. But this notion of calling it Atzeres maybe suggests not entirely, and that it may be much more like the moon of Pesach than a separate entity, completely separate entity into its own right. Again, one of the issues that people have with Shavuos is that it doesn't seem to have the gravitas of Pesach and Sukkot that some people will say. It doesn't have the mitzvos, it doesn't have. Now, again, it did when we were celebrating it in a time of harvests. It had some gravitas in that it was the beginning of the Bikurim season, and it was also the wheat harvest symbolized by the breads. But even that is all happening in the Beit HaMikdash. Sukkot and Pesach have elements that are brought to the home. Shavuos doesn't have that. Even at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, Shavuos didn't necessarily have that. unless you were an actual farmer bringing the Bikurim, and you decided that you're starting because the Bikurim season, it's just the beginning of the Bikurim season. It's not the only day you could bring your first fruits. It's just it's the beginning of it. So maybe even then you would have felt that it doesn't seem to have the same gravitas as Pesach and Sukkot in its own right. But you'll see that, like, in the treatment of it in different texts and commentaries, that Shavuos is to some degree seen as a kind of moon of Sukkot, of Pesach, and that it's meant to be understood together with Pesach. So you'll hear people will say something like, on Pesach we got our physical freedom, but on Shavuos we're getting our spiritual freedom. On Pesach we're freed from physical captivity, but on Shavuos we're marked as servants of God. So you'll see a lot of comparisons back and forth between Pesach and Shavuos in this regard. So anyways, so that's that. So that's all that Shavuos gets in the mitzvah category, and then so far, and then you have this next mitzvah, which is 163, which is that he commanded us to rest from work on the first day of Tishrei, and that is, may he be exalted, saying, on the first day of this month you shall have a Shabbaton. And we've already seen that this term Shabbaton is a positive commandment. So that's why he's listing it here, because again, this is the list of positive commandments. So that's what we're calling active rest. Active rest, it's a positive, it's somehow an active positive commandment. And so this is the first day of Tishrei. It's interesting, he quotes this from the words on the first of the month. He doesn't even say the seventh month. He doesn't even quote that part of the verse. Yeah, and this is Rosh Hashanah, and on several occasions we've talked about how Rosh Hashanah is another one of these holidays that is celebrated in a way that makes the text sort of surprising. The text related to Rosh Hashanah is underwhelming compared to the experience of Rosh Hashanah that a person would have today, or would have had, for a long time. It has become, for most Jews, one of the most important days of the year, and certainly nowadays, where we already are mentored to begin thinking from the beginning of Elul, just so we can be prepared for Rosh Hashanah, to already start thinking about the themes that are going to be important on Rosh Hashanah. We already start in Elul, and I've even seen, I mentioned this to you before, but I've seen those who go back to the 17th of Tammuz as which is the beginning of what we call the 3 weeks, the fast of the 17th of Tammuz. I've seen people already thematically going back to there, and I would not be shocked if in a few years you have people that are starting their preparations for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur on the 17th of Tammuz, because on the 17th of Tammuz the tablets are shattered, and Yom Kippur represents when we get the second tablets. So if you're really mindful of what's going on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and even to some degree Sukkot, you really need to start thinking for the 17 Tammuz. It'll never end, that time preparation. But anyways, it's just sort of, this allows me to just experience the surprise that you get every time you look at the Torah's discussion of Rosh Hashanah as a day of resting from creative work. Okay, now we come to Yom Kippur. Now, Yom Kippur is going to have positive and negative commandments associated with it. But in the positive section on 164, it says, that is, that he commanded us to fast on the 10th of Tishrei, and that is his, may he be exalted, saying, afflict your souls, which we do through fasting, and we have customs to not wear leather shoes, and etc. And the explanation appears in the Sifra, affliction that destroys a soul. And what is that? Abstention from eating and drinking. And the tradition likewise came to teach that it's forbidden for bathing. So now when he says tradition, what do they use in Hebrew? HaKabbalah. He calls it Kabbalah, so that means a transmission. Again, this is a Hebrew translation of the Arabic. But so he doesn't call it, it's not is that the same thing as saying it's a rabbinic law? It's certainly language that suggests it's not biblical. The biblical one is eating and drinking. The next part he's calling Kabbalah. So a lot of times when they use the word Kabbalah, they mean it comes from the prophets, and that, as far as category of law, is treated as identical with rabbinic law. And the tradition likewise came to teach that is forbidden for bathing, anointing, which is oil, wearing shoes, which we understand to mean leather shoes, and sexual relations. By the way, there was a couple of years of controversy about wearing Crocs or comfortable, other kinds of comfortable man-made shoes. Whether somehow these, because they happen to be very comfortable and people wear them for comfort at other times of the year, are they somehow a contradiction to the point of not wearing leather shoes? Or not, when it says not wearing shoes, the assumption is that we're not supposed to wear comfortable shoes. But what if you have extremely comfortable shoes, they just don't happen to be made out of leather? So there was back and forth, including letters to the editor in this newspaper called Yated Naaman. They had these letters back and forth, and it became like a big controversy. They were mostly focused on Tisha B'Av, which is a rabbinic holiday to begin with, but it spilled over into a discussion about Yom Kippur. And I don't know what different communities feel about it. The communities I've been in, folk seem to be happy with people wearing very comfortable sneakers or Crocs or things like that. But I know it was a controversy, and I wouldn't doubt that there are some communities that are very careful about the shoes they wore. When I was little, what I remember was that people would be in their socks in shul. I remember people they would come to shul in their shoes, they would take off their shoes, and they would just be in socks. I don't remember when I was little in shul if people had tennis shoes. Do you guys have a memory of that? Like when I'm saying when I'm little, let's say in the 60s.
No.
So, do you remember anybody wearing tennis shoes?
No, but I was going to conservative shuls at that point. So
no,
but
they
you had
still
older
do it.
guys. Yeah, the older guys should have. still done it even in the conservative synagogue, right?
Yeah, sure. I
Well,
think,
I don't remember.
but I don't
remember.
I
Yeah.
do remember some people wearing tennis shoes in my shul. I remember that.
Right. By the time I was a
Right.
teenager, I remember I have a vivid image of Scheinberg wearing tennis shoes at the Kotel, which I said to myself, I have to burn this into my memory. And I did. I just like looked at him. He was right next to the Kotel. This is on Tisha B'Av, not on Yom Kippur. But I have this image of him in tennis shoes. So that was, when I'm 20, but I don't know why. But as a kid, I remember people taking off their shoes, but I don't remember it. Anyways, that is that, and also intimate relationship between husband and wife. The resting is designated for all of these actions by his saying, it is a Shabbat of Shabbaton, and you shall afflict your souls. So again, is he suggesting that these are biblical? These other ones? He called it a tradition, and at least in the Hebrew, they use the word Kabbalah, which again is usually euphemistic for something that comes from the prophets and is not the same as biblical law. But then he says, and the resting is designated for all of these actions, by his saying, it is a Shabbat of Shabbaton, and you shall afflict your souls. It is as if he said that the obligation is the specific resting from work and a specific resting from nourishment of the body and its preservation. And he hence said, Shabbaton. The language of the Sifra is, from where do we know that bathing and anointment are forbidden on Yom Kippur? Hence we learn to say it is a Shabbat of Shabbaton. That is to say that the resting be from all of these things until he arrives at affliction. Again, from the end here, it sounds like he's saying that the other ones, which we call the Inuyim, the sufferings, are also biblical. And from where do we know that bathing and anointment are forbidden on Yom Kippur? That's part of that group that includes the wearing of shoes. Hence, we learn to say it is a Shabbat of Shabbaton. That is to say that the resting be from all of these things until he arrives at affliction. So that makes it sound like it is that these are biblical. So then the question is, why is he saying HaKabbalah? Why is he talking about the Kabbalah? So we'll look at that. See if anybody talks about that tomorrow. I look forward to learning with you guys tomorrow.
I do too. Thank you.
And even though I didn't say it, it was in my mind that our learning today is in the merit of the speedy and safe release of the hostages, of the healing of the wounded, of the comforting of the bereaved, of the protection for our soldiers and for all the people in Israel and for all of us. And may Mashiach Tzidkenu come be meher b'yameinu. Be well.
Amen.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.